Okay, I'm back again, and this time I'm going to do something a little different. In my previous videos, I've been providing arguments for Christianity, the deity of Christ, the resurrection, and the Trinity. But in this video, I'm actually going to be responding, or more or less examining, Richard Dawkins and his criteria of what makes someone a Christian or what makes someone an atheist. And we're going to examine two people that Richard Dawkins looks at in his book, The God Delusion, and we're going to see if he is consistent in his criteria. We will begin. As Dawkins says in his book, The God Delusion, page 310, he says, Hitler was born into a Catholic family. He went to Catholic schools and churches as a child. Hitler never formally renounced his Catholicism, and there are indications throughout his life that he remained religious, if not Catholic. He seems to have retained a belief in some sort of divine providence. Now, at this point, we're going to take a look at some key features. Like, we're also going to look at a later quote Dawkins says about Hitler. But we're going to look at what some historians say. Now, this historian, we're actually going to get back to him a little later, says he's a historian who's a professor at the King's College in London, Richard Overy. He says, Hitler's few private remarks on Christianity portray a profound contempt and indifference. And next we have Bullock, who is a renowned Hitler historian, and who actually Richard Dawkins quotes, or tries to quote in his book. I couldn't actually find the reference to where Bullock said what Dawkins says he said, but obviously, if Richard Dawkins quotes from this man in his book, obviously he views him as a credible historical source on Hitler. So what does he say about Hitler's beliefs? He says, Hitler had been brought up Catholic and was impressed by the organization and power of the church, but to its teachings he showed only the sharpest hostility. He detested Christianity's ethics in particular. Wait a minute. So, why does Dawkins say that there's a lot of evidence that Hitler remained Christian throughout his life, that he remained Catholic throughout his life, but historians seem to say the exact opposite? Well, what if you want to say, well, I don't care what historians say. Was there anyone who knew Hitler who saw what he believed about Christianity? Well, in fact, there was. In these diaries written by a guy who actually knew and met with Hitler, he talks about an encounter he had with Hitler. He says, after long discussion about Vatican and Christianity, the Fuhrer is a fierce opponent of all that humbug. Notice, he refers to Hitler calling Christianity humbug. He goes on, but he forbids me to leave the church for tactical reasons. And so, for a decade now, I have paid my church taxes to support such rubbish. That is what hurts me most. But there's a further objection. What about the beliefs of the German people? What did they believe? Were they what we would consider Orthodox Christians? I mean, Hitler, with these historians, definitely did not believe in Christianity. He did not believe in its ethics or anything like that. But did his German people believe in that kind of stuff? Well, I happen to own a book called The Dictators, Hitler's Germany, Stalin's Russia by Richard Overy, the guy I mentioned earlier, and I took some pictures out of it. And he says what the German people believed about God. He said they championed the idea of a Germanic savior, Jesus the hero, the fighter of God, in place of a cosmopolitan Jesus clothed in humanity, pacifism, and self-denial. So that's what they believed about Jesus. Obviously, a very different view of Jesus than we would have. What did they believe about the afterlife? Well, he says, that here a quote from a German at this time. He says, "The kingdom of heaven is within us." So they believed that the afterlife was something inside of us, not an external ultimate reality. He goes on to talk about what they believed about God, and he says that the idea of the German God was an expression of the particular spirituality of the German people, not the party of God of others. Faith in a God revealed to the Germans replaced in faith in an immanent, transcendent God. And he's saying that this is the type of Christianity that Hitler came to when he came into power. This was what represented Christianity. I will go on. He talks about that Hitler was a form of, that Hitler believed that his few private remarks on Christianity betrayed a deep contempt and indifference towards it. But Hitler, he also says, Hitler believed that religion was now decadent. And he says that, he says, here's a quote from Hitler. He says that the collapse of Christianity that we are now experiencing, the reason for this is this crisis was science. So Hitler says that the reason Christianity was going to fall is because of science. Now, if I were to attach that quote to Richard Dawkins, probably people wouldn't bat an eye, but let's go on. What about other specific beliefs about God? Well, he says his public utterances referred to God and spirit. But he says that the God that they believed in, what they might call God, is a sense of unity and purpose. World War II, so a German idea starting in World War II, suggested that God should be experienced as an inner feeling rather than an external morality. And that is the type of Christianity that Hitler was embracing, or was pretending to embrace, during parts of the Third Reich. It wasn't what we would consider Orthodox Christianity. But let's look at what Dawkins says as a counterpoint. He doesn't necessarily believe this. He, from what I can tell, believes that Hitler is a Christian. But he's willing to offer an argument saying that even if Hitler wasn't a Christian, that he still believes that this problem lies with Christianity. He says, "Nobody could deny that Hitler was capable of such insincerity. If this was his real motive for pretending to be religious, it serves to us as a reminder that Hitler didn't carry out his atrocities single-handedly. The terrible deeds themselves were carried out by soldiers and their officers, most of whom were surely Christian. Indeed, the Christianity of the German people underlings the very hypothesis we are discussing, a hypothesis to explain the supposed insincerity of Hitler's religious professing." So Dawkins is basically saying here that, well, it doesn't matter if Hitler was himself a Christian, because he used Christianity to unite the German people against Jewish people. And he was able, and he goes throughout his book trying to say that it was Christianity that caused what Hitler did. But this point is contradicted directly by Hitler. Look at a quote from Hitler, where Hitler says pretty much the exact opposite, that Christianity can be used. It's the best system to use to trick people or to misguide people like this. He says, this is a direct quote from Hitler, he says, You see, it has been our misfortune to have the wrong religion. Why didn't we have the religion of the Japanese, who regarded sacrifice to the fatherland as the highest good? The Mohammedan religion, too, would have been much more compatible to us than Christianity. Why did it have to be Christianity, with its meekness and flabbedness? Wow, it really sounds like a sincere Christian there, doesn't it? It really sounds like a guy who thought Christianity was the perfect religion to trick people with. No, he says that Shintoism and Islam would have been his preferable religions. So, that is the criteria that Dawkins uses to portray Hitler as a Christian. And say, his criteria is that basically it comes down to, well, he said in a lot of places that he was Christian, even though if we actually examine what this really meant, it had nothing to do with what we would call Orthodox Christianity. In fact, I would say that Jehovah's Witnesses, who I do not necessarily consider to be Christians, are more Christian. I would be more okay with calling them Christians than I would be okay with calling the type of system that Hitler was employing as Christian. But now we're going to look at someone else. What does Richard Dawkins say about Thomas Jefferson? What religion was he? Well, we'll first look at a quote from Richard Dawkins about Thomas Jefferson, and then we'll look at some of Jefferson's own quotes, what he says. And these are just the kind of things that Richard Dawkins would use for Hitler quotes to prove that he was a devout Christian, so we'll look at those. He says, the following statements of Jefferson is indistinguishable from what we now call agnosticism. Christopher Hitchens, in his biography, Thomas Jefferson, author of America, thinks it is likely that Jefferson was an atheist. And then Richard Dawkins goes on to quote from a speech where Jefferson says that Christianity, he says that you should question the existence of God. Now, questioning the existence of God does not necessarily make one an atheist or an agnostic. It just is an encouragement to examine things. He also says here that Jefferson said that Christianity is the most perverse system ever shown to man. Now, I'm not going to actually talk about this quote because I'm going to link in the description box a really good video dealing with that quote. So watch that if you want to know about that. But now we're going to start to look at some quotes from Thomas Jefferson on Christianity, what he believes. So here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. I am a Christian. Wow, that's wait a minute. We have Thomas Jefferson say, I am a Christian. We have Hitler saying, Christianity is the wrong religion. Which one is a Christian? The one who says Christianity is the wrong religion. Which one was, according to Richard Dawkins, was probably an atheist or an agnostic? Well, according to Richard Dawkins, it's Thomas Jefferson. Also, look at something else at the end here of Dawkins' or at the end of Dawkins' statement. He says that Jefferson's statements, such as Christianity is the most perverted system ever shown to man, are compatible with theism, but also with atheism. So wait, Richard Dawkins' argument at the end here is that, well, you can't prove that he's not an atheist. And his ultimate conclusion is that he probably was either an atheist or an agnostic, even though everyone would agree that he is a deist. But, yeah, Thomas Jefferson says, I am a Christian, and he goes on to say, in the only sense in which he wishes anyone to be, sincerely attached to his doctrines in preference to all others, ascribing to himself every human excellence, and believing that he never claimed anything other. Let's look at another statement of Jefferson. I, too, have made a wee little book from the same materials which I call the philosophy of Jesus. It is a paradigma of his doctrines made by cutting the texts out of his book and arranging them on the pages of a blank book in a certain order of time or subject, a more beautiful or precious morsel of ethics I have never seen. It is a doctrine of proof that I am a real Christian. That is to say, a disciple of the doctrines of Jesus. So he says, I am a real Christian. So Jefferson says, I am a Christian. I am a real Christian. Dawkins, he's an agnostic. He's an atheist. All right, we'll look at one last quote. And he says, I have little doubt that the whole world of our country will soon be railed to the unity of the Creator, and I hope to the pure doctrines of Jesus also. So what ultimately do we get as the sort of beliefs of Thomas Jefferson? We get the sort of belief that he believes that Christianity's morality system is a system that he has not ever seen anything greater than it. He says here that he has never seen a more beautiful or precious morsel of ethics, never seen it, than he'll find in the teachings of Jesus. He says that he hopes that the whole country comes to believe in the Creator, or comes to the unity of the Creator. And he says, I am a Christian on multiple occasions. Yet, this is the man, which Jefferson says is probably an atheist. Now, I would like to make it clear, I'm not saying that Jefferson is necessarily a Christian. Jefferson, on several occasions, does say that he denies the Trinity and several other things that would be intrinsic to Christian value. But the fact is that if we were to apply the same standards that Dawkins applied to Hitler, we would conclude that that Thomas Jefferson was much more so a Christian than Hitler was. And if we were to apply the same standards that Dawkins applied to Jefferson, we would have to conclude that Hitler was an atheist. But it's funny. Is it just a coincidence that a man like Hitler, Dawkins thinks, was a Christian, and a man like Jefferson is a man that Dawkins thinks was an atheist or agnostic? Is that a coincidence? Well, I thank you for watching, and God bless.